Snip, snip, snip. The sound of the scissors cutting my long black hair echoed in my mind. This was the moment when I turned into a boy for money. My parents forced me to do it. But before I continue, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification button. Do this, and you will become the first millionaire in your family. Charlotte, Charlotte, my mother bolted through the door one afternoon. I was sitting at the dinner table helping my 7-year-old brother Jaden with his homework. "What's wrong, Mom?" I asked, startled by her sudden intrusion. "Guess what?" my mother said, and her eyes grew brighter as she spoke. "What?" I asked my mother. I simply detested guessing games since it usually turns into one of my parents telling me about their newest get-rich scheme. "Mr. James is coming to town," my mother squealed. "Who?" I asked. My brother chimed in, sounding a bit annoyed. "You are so lame. You know, the host of How Tough Are You?" How Tough Are You is a game show that recruits teenage boys and puts them through a series of tasks. I hated watching that show since it usually ended up with one of the boys eating something gross like a slug or putting their hands into something like a container filled with spiders. "So why are you excited about that?" I asked, puzzled. "You are going to be on the show," my mom exclaimed. My jaw dropped open. "What? How am I going to be on the show? That show is only for boys. I'm not a boy." "Not yet, you're not," my mother said. I tried to find out what she meant, but she refused to answer. I was twisting and turning in bed when my dad got home. I heard muffled conversation coming from the TV room. I snuck out of bed and hid in the shadows as I eavesdropped on my parents' conversation. "I'm telling you, John, we struck gold this time," my mother said excitedly. "Do you think she could pull it off?" my dad said, stroking his chin. "She doesn't have the shape or figure of an age 15 girl. We could use that to our advantage. All she needs to do to seal the deal is cut her hair," my mother said. I placed my hand over my mouth to stifle the cry that tried to escape. I tiptoed back to my room with tears in my eyes. How dare they bring me into one of their get-rich-quick schemes? That night, I contemplated running away, but then I thought about Jaden and the fact that he might end up just like our parents, jumping from one scheme to the next. I had to stay for him. The next day, my dad called a family meeting. "Okay, Charlotte and Jaden," my father said with a broad smile on his face. "Your mother came up with a brilliant idea." My stomach turned as I sat and waited for my parents to tell me what their plan was for me. "We decided that Charlotte will be a contestant on How Tough Are You?" my father said as he came over and patted me on the back. "Charlotte?" my brother said, looking at me sideways. "The same Charlotte that's afraid of lizards, roaches, and every creepy crawling thing under the sun?" My brother curled up in a ball, clutching his belly as he rolled around laughing at my demise. "And what makes you think that I want to do this?" I asked my parents boldly, looking them in the eyes. "Oh, honey," my mother said as she sat next to me and held my hands. $5 million! Think of what $5 million can do for us. $5 million or 5 years in prison if they find out that I lied about being a boy, I scoffed. "Listen, your mother and I spoke about this last night, and we decided that if you win, we will stop trying to come up with ways to get rich quick," my father said. "Fine," I said reluctantly. The next day was a casting call for contestants. That night, I sat in a puddle of my cut hair holding a jockstrap, wondering if I made a mistake. My name was no longer Charlotte, but Charlie. The next day, we went on set. There were about 50 boys lined up waiting to enter the studio. After a grueling interview process, 19 boys, including myself, were chosen. I couldn't believe that I pulled it off. "Congratulations, boys, you are officially contestants on How Tough Are You?" Mr. James exclaimed. After the interview, I asked a staff member for directions to the washroom. I almost headed into the ladies' washroom, but quickly made a detour to the men's. I hesitated before I entered. There were 2 boys using the urinals. I felt my face redden because they were just peeing right there, right in front of each other. I quickly entered a stall. I waited until I was sure they were gone before using the bathroom. When I was finished, I washed up quickly and rejoined my family. "Okay, parents, it's time to say goodbye to your sons," Mr. James said. "The next time that you see them, you and your family may be millionaires. Follow me as we will need you to sign contracts for your sons. This way," Mr. James said and walked off. I hugged my parents and my brother goodbye before being ushered away. That night, we had a feast. There were 6 tables piled with foods, desserts, and drinks. I watched as the other boys laughed and mingled with each other. I sat in a corner picking at my food, wondering how I was going to pretend to be a boy for 2 weeks. After the feast, we were paired up. There were 2 boys per room. Mr. James told us that the person we were paired up with would be our teammate for the duration of the contest. I was teamed up with a boy named Karen. He seemed kind of shy. I was happy when he didn't ask me any questions when we got to our room, as I was too worried about what would take place over the next 14 days. The blare of a trumpet woke us up the next morning. A big, brawny man opened the doors and switched on the lights in the rooms. The groans of the boys sounded in the hallway.
"It's 5 a.m. That means it's time to wake up," he said over a megaphone. "If you look at the base of your beds, you will see 7 track pants and 7 t-shirts. This will be your uniform for the next 14 days. You have 5 minutes to get dressed and get out of bed, or you will be disqualified."
I panicked silently. How am I supposed to get dressed when 𝗕𝗏 is in the room? To my surprise, 𝗕𝗏 grabbed his clothes and headed to the tiny bathroom in the chambers without a word. I dressed quickly before 𝗕𝗏 came back.
"You have 1 more minute,"
the man said. I rushed to the hallway without even brushing my teeth. I gagged. Is this what the next 14 days are going to be like? At the end of the 5 minutes, all 20 boys were outside their doors waiting for instructions. The big, brawny man introduced himself as Mr. Marshall. He told us that every exercise we did from this time forward, we would obtain a score.
"Now, let's go for a jog,"
Mr. Marshall said as he led us to a big field at the back of the studio.
20 laps, let's go. You must cross the 20 laps with your partner, otherwise it doesn't count."
He blew the whistle around his neck and the boys took off. As I began to run, I saw 𝗕𝗏 fell into step next to me. "Pace yourself," he said. "Stay with me and you'll be fine." That morning, not only did we have to run 20 miles, but we had to do an obstacle course. I felt as though I was in boot camp for bad-behaved teens. During the last stretch of the obstacle course, my leg got caught in the rope bridge that I was climbing. I watched as 𝗕𝗏 sprinted ahead of me. "𝗕𝗏, wait!" I shouted. 𝗕𝗏 stopped and looked around and sprinted back to me. "Keep still," he said calmly as he untangled my leg. "Okay, let's go," he said as soon as the rope was loose. We crossed the line in 6th place. "Sorry," I said as I dashed a bottle of water over my face to cool myself down. "That's okay. That's what teammates are for." He smiled at me. For the first time since entering the competition, because of 𝗕𝗏, I felt that I would be able to make it till the last day of the competition. Over the next few days, 𝗕𝗏 and I got closer. At nights, we would plan our strategies based on what we remembered from previous recordings of the show. Each day that passed, contestants were sent home. Some of the challenges were sitting in a bathtub with frogs, drinking raw eggs, drinking pureed bugs, jogging in socks, then placing your partner's sock in your mouth. The worst challenge for me was sucking worms off 𝗕𝗏 and spitting them in a bowl. Day 13. That night, there were only 3 contestants left for the finale. Myself, 𝗕𝗏, and Marlon. Even though there were other rooms available, 𝗕𝗏 and I still shared a room. I realized that I was starting to have feelings for 𝗕𝗏. He was just so kind and funny, and I knew I could always rely on him. That night, while chatting with him, I impulsively leaned forward and kissed him. I figured, hey, that was my last night with him, so I may as well shoot my shot. Nothing could prepare me for what happened next. 𝗕𝗏 wiped his lips and said, "I'm sorry, Charlie, but I'm not gay." I giggled. "I'm not a boy, silly. I'm really a girl." There I was on the last night of the game show and spilling my guts about who I really was. Was I insane? "Well, I'm not a boy either," 𝗕𝗏 said and smiled. My brain was trying to comprehend what I just heard. "You what?" I asked again. "I'm not a boy," he whispered. "My name is Carrie-Ann McIntosh. It's nice to meet you." 𝗕𝗏, or should I say Carrie-Ann, extended her hand to me. I shook it. "Hi, my name is Charlotte Lewis," I whispered. We exchanged stories about how we ended up on the show. Unlike me, Carrie-Ann enjoyed the show and would never miss an episode when it aired. Her grandmother needed the money for surgery, and this was the only way that her family could afford it. "Let's make a pact," she said. "If either one of us wins, we share the money." "Deal," I said as I shook her hand firmly. Then I began to laugh. "What are you laughing at?" Carrie-Ann asked, bewildered. "I can't believe that I kissed a girl," I shrieked. Day 14. Finally, it was the last day of the contest. All parents and past contestants were invited to be the studio audience. "Good luck," I said and gave Carrie-Ann a big hug. "May the best girl win," she said as she hugged me back. We walked into the studio wondering what the final task would be. "Good morning to our studio audience. Today, we will see which one of these brave boys will be going home with $5 million, Mr. James said. The audience applauded and shrieked. I looked up in the audience and saw my parents, but I didn't see Jaden. "Okay, contestants. There are 3 curtains in front of you. 𝗕𝗏 curtain 1, Marlon curtain 2, and Charlie curtain 3. Mr. James said as he pointed in the direction of the curtains. "Okay, let's raise the curtains and show our contestants what their final challenge today will be," Mr. James said dramatically. A hushed silence spread over the audience. A look of horror washed over my face when I saw what was behind the curtain. Jaden! Jaden was tied to a chair. His mouth gagged, and in front of him were snakes. Very large snakes. My blood ran cold. "Okay, contestants, the first one to release their victim and bring them back to safety wins. The snakes are sound asleep." Mr. James checked the watch on his hand. "You have at least 3 minutes before they wake up.
Buzz.
The bell rang and I inched into the makeshift corridor to save my brother. I barely had enough space between the snakes to place my feet. I was halfway down to 𝗕𝗔𝗦𝗬 when I felt something move against my leg. I saw the 15 short years of my life flash before my eyes. I was paralyzed. I wanted to save 𝗕𝗔𝗦𝗬, but I was too afraid to move. Suddenly, a voice shouted, "Go, Charlie, go! You can do this!" It was Carrie Ann. I inhaled quickly and mustered every ounce of courage that I had and made my way to 𝗕𝗔𝗦𝗬. "Way to go, Charlie!" 𝗕𝗔𝗦 beamed with pride as I released him from his bondage. "Come on, hop on," I said, stooping down a bit so that 𝗕𝗔𝗦𝗬 could hop onto my back. I slowly made my way back to where I began. 𝗕𝗔𝗦𝗬 hopped off and Carrie Ann gave me a high five. "Way to go, bro," she said as she winked at me. "The time that we have all been waiting for is here. The results of the contest. Who is going home $5 million richer today?" Mr. James opened the envelope that was in his hand and continued. "The winner is Karen McIntosh." The audience cheered and balloons and confetti rained down on us. I watched as Carrie Ann received her check and posed for pictures. I was relieved that it was finally over. My parents rushed down from the audience and hugged me. They apologized for forcing me to go on the show, and they vowed to never put me or 𝗕𝗕𝗦𝗬 in harm's way again. My parents followed me into the chamber so I could retrieve my things. A few minutes after, Carrie Ann showed up and we introduced our families. In hushed whispers, Carrie Ann told her parents about the deal we made. They agreed to share the money and thanked me for keeping their daughter's secret. I'm happy to say that my parents were true to their word. They never took part in another get-rich scheme. That year I may have lost my hair, but I gained something much, much more. To this day, Carrie Ann and I still chat, but we never told anyone how we truly met. I wasn't really very close to my parents when I was growing up. They never really had much time for me. I used to wonder what it would be like to have a mom that would bake cakes with me or take me to the movies. All I ever heard was, "Go to your room, Ella. Dad and I are very busy." Mom and Dad were always huddled together, whispering about something. If I walked into the room, they would stop talking and look weirdly at each other. The only time I really felt happy was when I was at school with my friends. But before I go on, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell, or you might end up with psycho parents just like mine. I loved being at school. I had so much fun with my friends. We would sit together in the playground talking about boys and discussing what our plans were for the weekend. Sometimes I wished that I could stay at school forever. When the bell went at the end of the day, I knew that my fun had finished for the day. My parents were really mean to me. They always left me out of things, like the time when I came home from school and heard them talking in the basement. I went down the stairs to the basement and called out to them. "I'm home. What are you two doing?"
"Don't come down here, Ella,"
said Dad.
"Just go to your room."
I did as Dad told me. I knew there was no point in arguing with him. It was the same all the time. Go to your room, don't disturb your mom and I, we're busy. I would always try to go to sleep as early as possible. That way it would soon be morning and I could get back to school. I remember the first time I saw Charlie. I was walking to school with my friends and he was standing at the entrance looking a bit lost. "Who is that?" I said to my friend Carla. "No idea," she replied. It didn't take long for us to find out. We went into the classroom and sat down. A few minutes later, our teacher walked in with the boy we had seen. "Everyone, this is Charlie. This is his first day at our school, so I hope you will all make him feel welcome," she said. I looked at Charlie and he smiled at me. My stomach turned over and my face went bright red. He must think I'm a complete idiot, I thought. I looked away and tried not to catch his eye for the rest of the class. At break time, I ran to find my friends. "Have you seen Charlie?" I asked them. "He is gorgeous." "I think Ella has a crush," they said, laughing. That afternoon, we had a geography field trip. We were going to visit a local museum. We went out to the school bus. As we got on, our teacher took our names and told us we would be looking around the museum in pairs. I couldn't believe my luck when he said, "Ella, you go with Charlie." "Okay, sir," I said. I didn't dare look at any of my friends because I knew they would be pulling faces at me. Charlie was so much fun. He kept telling jokes and entertaining me. I had never had so much fun on a field trip before. When I got home from school, I ran straight to my room and grabbed my diary. I started writing all about Charlie in my diary. All about his long brown hair and freckled face. How his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I can't wait to see him tomorrow," I wrote. I put my diary away in my drawer and went downstairs to the kitchen. Mom was making dinner and Dad was looking at some files. As I went into the room, Dad pushed the files out of sight.
"Eat your dinner and then go straight back to your room,"
Dad snapped. He looked really stressed again.
"I'm going for a quick shower,"
he said to Mom.
"I won't be long, then we need to go through some papers together."
I ate my dinner in silence. Mom sat staring out the window, deep in thought. When I had finished my dinner, I went upstairs to my room. As I walked towards my door, I could see Dad was sitting at my table. What is he doing? I thought. I walked into the room and Dad looked up at me.
Why are you wasting your time writing a silly diary?
He asked me.
A diary is no use to anyone.
I couldn't believe it. He was reading my diary. Give it to me, I shouted. That's my private diary. How could you read it? Dad gave me the diary and left my room. I was so angry with him. It wasn't fair. They treated me so badly. Why can't I have normal parents like everyone else, I thought. The next morning when I woke up, Dad had already left for work. I suppose it was good, really. At least I didn't have to speak to him. I set off for school. I couldn't wait to get there to see Charlie. But Charlie wasn't at school that day. He must be sick, I thought. But days went by and still Charlie didn't come back to school. I felt really disappointed. I hope he hasn't changed schools, I thought. I missed him so much. The only good thing at that time was that Mom and Dad had suddenly cheered up. Dad was actually singing to himself when I came in from school. He smiled at me as I walked into the room.
Did you have a good day, Ella?
He asked. Yeah, it was okay, I guess, I said in surprise. Dad never asked me about my day. I wondered why he was in such a good mood. Where's Mom? I asked.
Oh, she's just gone down to the basement for something,
he replied. Okay, I'll go find her, I said. Suddenly, Dad's mood changed.
Don't go to the basement, Ella. We've told you before, you stay away from there,
he shouted. What is it about the basement? I thought to myself. Why don't they want me to go near it? Well, a few days after that, I found out. It was a Saturday morning and Mom and Dad were going out shopping. We won't be too long, Mom called as she got in the car with Dad. I went and sat on the sofa. I looked out of the window and wished that the rain would stop. I felt so bored sitting there all alone with nothing to do. That's when I heard the noise. It sounded like a scratching sound and it was coming from the basement. I knew that I wasn't supposed to go down there, but curiosity got the better of me. I ran down the stairs and listened at the basement door. I heard the noise again. There was definitely someone or something in there. I opened the door and went into the basement. There, in the corner of the room, I saw a bed and someone was laid on it. Who are you? I shouted. What are you doing in my basement? I couldn't see very clearly, so I walked a few steps closer. That's when I got the biggest shock of my life. Charlie was sitting on a bed in my basement. Charlie, I cried. What are you doing here? Charlie looked up at me. I'm here because of your psycho parents, he said. What? I had to pinch myself because I thought I was dreaming. My parents are rich and your parents have kidnapped me and brought me here, I guess for ransom, said Charlie. I escaped from them once, but they found me again. So that's why you haven't been at school? I said. I told Charlie not to worry. I said that I was going to help him to escape. Well, it was the least I could do. We packed up Charlie's things and I grabbed some of my stuff and threw it in a bag. We had to get as far away from here as possible. We ran to the bus station and I bought 2 tickets. We stood waiting for the bus. I was so scared in case my parents drove around the corner, but luckily, the bus pulled in and we jumped on it. I had no idea where we were heading or what we would do when we got there, but I was just relieved that I had managed to get Charlie away from them. I'm so sorry about my parents, I said to him. I don't know why they would do something like that. It's okay, it's not your fault, he said. Suddenly, the bus screeched to a halt and the door opened. I looked up and saw my mom and dad getting on the bus. They walked down to where we were sitting.
Come on, you two,
Dad said.
We're taking you home with us.
No, I said. I know what you've done to Charlie. I know that you are bad guys.
Oh, you've got it all wrong,
replied Dad.
We're not the bad guys. We're saving Charlie.
Dad explained that him and Mom worked for a special government department. He told us that Charlie's parents had asked the government for help because some bad guys were plotting to kidnap Charlie and hold him for ransom.
They just needed us to keep you hidden until the bad guys gave up looking for you,
Dad said.
But you didn't make it easy for us when you kept on escaping.
Mom told us that Charlie was going to come and live with our family. He wouldn't have to sleep in the basement anymore, not now that I knew exactly what was going on. We got into Dad's car and drove home. I felt awful that I had thought my parents were bad guys, but it did seem pretty obvious at the time. When we arrived home, Mom showed Charlie to his bedroom. He was having the room next to mine. I couldn't help but feel quite excited that Charlie was going to be living with us. I would get to see him at school and then spend every evening with him too. When Charlie had put away all his things, we went downstairs to see what was for dinner. I haven't had time to cook anything, said Mom. Dad and I will go out and get some pizza. Why don't you two sit down and put the TV on? Charlie and I went into the lounge and put on a movie. I could hardly concentrate on the film with Charlie sitting so close to me. I kept secretly looking at him. I felt like I was dreaming. I don't think I had ever felt so happy for a long time. We were probably about 10 minutes into the movie when we heard an almighty crash and the glass in our room window smashed to pieces. I looked towards the window and saw 2 men wearing black masks coming through the window. Oh no, these must be the kidnappers my parents had told us about, I thought. Before I had the chance to do anything, one of them had grabbed hold of Charlie and they were pulling him towards the door. Charlie looked at me, his face was terrified. I looked around me frantically, wondering what I should do. Suddenly, I saw my diary on the table next to the sofa. I grabbed it and threw it as hard as I could at the man who had a hold of Charlie. The diary hit him so hard, it knocked him to the ground and then ricocheted off him and hit the other man on the head. Both of the men were lying on the ground unconscious. That's when I heard Dad's voice. I hadn't heard him come in. He looked at the 2 men lying on the floor.
Well, I guess keeping a diary does come in handy after all,
he said, laughing. Dad pulled out some handcuffs and put them on the 2 men. Mom had called the police as soon as they had got home, so it wasn't long before they were putting the 2 guys into the back of a police car. We went into the kitchen and sat down to eat our pizza. Are you 2 okay now? Asked Mom. Yes, we're fine, I said. But I've just got one question, Mom, I said. How did you know that Charlie was going to my school? Mom looked at Dad, then Dad told me. It was when he had read my diary. He told us that I had described Charlie in such great detail that even though I hadn't written his name, Dad had just been sure I was talking about the prince that had escaped from him. I felt so embarrassed. What would Charlie think of me, I thought. I looked at him expecting him to laugh at me, but instead he said, "You saved my life. How can I ever repay you?" I have no idea where I found the courage to say what I did, but I just blurted out, "Well, you could take me on a date if you like." "I have a feeling I'm going to be taking you on a lot of dates," said Charlie, smiling. After the police had arrested the bad guys, it was safe for Charlie to go back and live with his own family. But I didn't mind. I had lots of dates to look forward to with him.